Ryan Beto, NDSU Extension Specialist in Cropping Systems. So a lot of the research that's been done on soybeans in North Dakota has been on the eastern part of the state. So the past couple of years, John Rickertson and I partnered together to have 2 trials in the Dickinson area as well as the Hettinger area. And this past year we actually had a site in Mandan as well, looking at some different populations, different maturities of soybeans, as well as different nitrogen management strategies. And we kind of found what we thought we'd find is that you want to put inoculant on your soybeans. Putting inoculant down is really the best way to get the most economic, efficient use of that plant, of that crop out in the field. You don't really need to apply any nitrogen fertilizer. Just use the natural nitrogen fixation that soybean can do. We also kind of found some interesting things that John, especially down Hettinger, is building off of by looking at some different populations. We found that out in this drier environment we can get away with a little bit lower population than what they can in the east, since we don't really have that high yield potential due to our limited moisture conditions out here. With this nitrogen trial, we took your typical 160,000 rate and we cut that in half. So we just had an 80,000 and 160,000. And in a very dry year, there's no significant yield difference between that 80 and that 160. But the reason that you want to have it a slightly higher is because that soybean, it's a really great plant that has that ability to bush out if there's space around there, right? If you start to cut it a little too low, if there's some factor, whether it's maybe hail or animals or some issue with the soil that reduces your stand, at that 80,000 mark and lower, you don't really have a whole lot of leeway on being able to recover from that stand loss event. But you go too high and you're kind of maybe wasting some of that seed cost where you'd be just fine. I think down here, 140,000 is a pretty good recommendation. You could go down to 120. But yeah, with our trial looking at 80 versus 160, some years there's a difference, some years not so much. So that population, I think we can really cut it lower out here in the west. So the interesting thing about out west here is a lot of folks are really new to soybeans still, right? So we don't have that inoculant built up in your soil. I definitely think that out here, at least the first several times that you try soybeans, that you should be putting it down consistently. There's some concerns I have about out west here is that we are starting to see these issues with low pH, and that low pH or that acidic soil can have impacts on bacteria. So definitely make sure that you're testing your soil. Also, if you do have too high of a nitrogen rate in that field, that bean isn't going to put that energy down into those nodules to feed that bacteria to get nitrogen in return. So the plant is going to take the most available nitrogen that it can get. If there isn't any, it'll put energy into those little root factories to get free nitrogen back from those bacteria. With this trial the past couple of years, it's been a really great building block for soybeans in western North Dakota. We looked at a couple different management options. We're using that to build new trials off of that. What we really want to see is you might not need that full 160,000 population. 80,000 is probably a little too low in some years because you're losing some of that yield potential. With the maturities, we didn't really see a whole lot of difference. There was variability year to year. And then with the nitrogen management strategies, just make sure you're putting down inoculant so that you're having that valid source of rhizobacterium in your soil. So with our trial, we only looked at 80,000 versus 160,000 just to kind of see how far we could really cut it and if there was much of a difference. I really like that 140,000 plants per acre for out here.